All right, day one, welcome to class. So we are in for an exciting study, and the reason it's exciting is because history repeats. And the more you know about it, the more informed you are today, the more informed voter and citizen you are, the more informed you are in your community. For example, over the weekend, we kidnapped the leader of Venezuela. Many people are saying on the news this morning that our military action there was illegal because it did not have congressional approval. Well, students of history would refer to the Nixon era and the War Powers Act, where the executive branch can take some military action, but they're under a timeline to then inform Congress and the public. One of our features of government, which we will study when we get to the Nixon era, one of our features of government is that we have an informed electorate. The reason our system of government works is because the citizenry is informed. And that's what I hope you get from this class. A desire to be informed, a desire to pay attention beyond your social media feeds. Also, I encourage you to do the reading. This week we have a little bit of the tail end of chapter 15, all of chapter 16, and then we have some recall and reflect questions. I put a disclaimer always that I want the class to be subject to change because sometimes we have current events that tie right into what we're studying. I cannot predict those. So I always try to have a little disclaimer, and I encourage you to not work too far ahead because of that. But for this week, we're just doing the recall and reflect questions. Those are at the end of each chapter. At the very end of each chapter, there's recall and reflect questions. Sometimes there's 4, sometimes there's 5, sometimes there's 6. But so this week, you have 6 questions that you're answering. 2 of the recall and reflect questions from chapter 15, and 4 of the recall and reflect questions from chapter 16. With those answers, I like to see at least 3 complete sentences. It's very easy to get to 3 complete sentences. You explain your answer. You can give your opinion of what you think of that answer. You can always add more. If you're struggling to come up with 3 complete sentences, please reach out to me. The reason I do that is because I had a professor once, everything was essay. Everything. Every homework assignment, every quiz, every exam, everything was essay. And I was like, what gives? Because nobody else did that. You know, all of my other professors, multiple choice, true and false, little bit here, little bit there, no real effort. And then this guy was just killing me with all these essays. So I asked him, I said, why do you do that? And he said, because if you can tell me about it, then I know that you've learned it. And that really resonated with me. So I want to know that you learned this. There are so many ways to cheat today, so many ways. And you can avail yourself to those without being caught in many instances. However, if you do that, then you miss out on the opportunity to be interesting, to be authentic, to work your brain and learn what you think of things. It's so important to have this knowledge because then as you see current events going forward, you can say, hey, that's sort of like this. And this is what we did then. And it was a disaster. So let's do something else this time. I really encourage you to do the reading. Put in the work. That was really driven home to me many years ago around a campfire. I was sitting with academics, doctors, lawyers, dentists, all kinds of really educated and successful people. The most interesting person around that campfire was an old cowboy who spent anytime there was inclement weather, he would read. And he spent his life working. And he was by far the most interesting person. He had every person there spellbound, listening to what he was saying. That's what I want for you. I want you to be the most interesting person in absolutely every room you walk into. When you're on social media, I want you to have the most interesting posts. And that comes from putting in the work to doing the reading, doing the thinking, answering the questions. That's what makes you interesting. That's what sets you apart. Because most people are just scrolling their phones. They're not any different than anybody else. The information they have is not unique. They haven't thought about it. They're just regurgitating what they're seeing. I don't want that for you. I want you to be able to think. I want you to be confronted with issues, easy issues, difficult issues, complicated matters, whatever it is, and know that you can do the research and that you can form your opinions. That's what I want for you. It makes you interesting. It makes you successful. And that's my goal for this class. So, okay, so this week it's recall and reflect questions. Also, I linked the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment in the announcement, in the module. I want you to read those. The National Archives has a little historical information about them. In chapter 15, we see after the Compromise of 1877, the Union, well, by then it's no longer Union and South, but the North loses interest in the South, essentially. And so that ushers in the Jim Crow era. So for example, the 15th Amendment is ratified before our class starts. It was ratified, I put a note here, in 1870. Passed is not the same as ratified. The Equal Rights Amendment was proposed in like the 20s or the 30s, the 1920s or 30s. It was passed in Congress maybe in the 70s. It's still not part of our Constitution because 3/4 of the states, which is necessary to ratify an amendment for it to become part of our Constitution, they've never done that. So always when we look at amendments, we need to see the date they were passed. That means the date both houses of Congress agreed. And then it gets sent to the states. And 3/4 of the states have to agree and ratify it within a certain time frame for it to become part of the Constitution. So the 14th and 15th Amendments, the 14th Amendment is ratified and becomes part of the Constitution in 1868, 9 years before our time period starts. The 15th Amendment is ratified in 1870 and becomes part of the Constitution 7 years before our time period starts. So why do I want you to read those? I want you to read them because the Plessy versus Ferguson case that is discussed in chapter 15, that is not just a Southern perversion of the Constitution. That's the Supreme Court of the United States perverting the Constitution. They took the 14th Amendment, which essentially provides equal protection under the law, and they created the separate but equal doctrine. They codified segregation and public accommodations with that decision. There was one heroic dissenting justice in Plessy versus Ferguson, Justice Harlan, John Marshall Harlan. He dissented. He said, our Constitution is colorblind. This segregation is creating a caste system. So that's what happened. We have the Compromise of 1877. The North loses interest in the South. We usher in the Jim Crow era. We see segregation. And things were already segregated before Plessy versus Ferguson. That's what started the case. Homer Plessy was of mixed race descent, and he boarded a Louisiana rail car and sat in the whites-only section. So we already had segregation in areas of the South. The Supreme Court takes it, perverts the 14th Amendment, creates the separate but equal doctrine that now we have segregation nationwide. We do not really see the realization of the protections in the 14th Amendment until 1964, almost 100 years after it's added to the Constitution, that we have the Civil Rights Act. Then the 15th Amendment. Why do I want you to read it? It's before our class period starts. I want you to read it because that is the amendment that gave African American men, not women. Women, we'll see they get the right to vote in 1920. We'll get to that. That's the 19th Amendment. But the 15th Amendment gives all men, regardless of national origin, ethnicity, the right to vote. We see then in the South, especially during this Jim Crow era, we see poll taxes. Many times, certain individuals did not have the opportunity. They didn't have equal work, equal pay. Those opportunities did not exist. The poll taxes were a means of eliminating the protections of the 15th Amendment. Same with literacy tests. when slavery was still in practice, it was against the law for slaves in many instances to learn to read and write. So these literacy tests to be able to vote, again, we're precluding people from being able to vote. So then in 1965, as we will see in our class, we have the Voting Rights Act that finally has federal enforcement and oversight of voting, so all eligible voters can vote. No more poll taxes, no more literacy tests. It all ties together. And so that's why I have my disclaimer, subject to change, because things are going to happen today. Things happened over the weekend. Things are going to happen tomorrow. We see history repeating. So I really want you to consume news, if at all possible. Okay, do the reading, do the work. I have included my cell phone at the bottom of this. It's also in the syllabus, my email. I will check both every day. If you can't come up with 3 sentences, please reach out to me. We can brainstorm how to do that, but it's 3 complete sentences for each answer. All right, so I will have all of the assignments and the quizzes, everything available. You can work at your own pace. I discourage that though, because again, things are going to happen that we're going to want to talk about. I post a video every Monday that goes into some background information about what we're studying that week. Hopefully also it ties it to something more current. So I do encourage you to just stick with the rhythm of the class, but that's up to you. It's an asynchronous class, so that's your decision. Please reach out to me with questions and have a wonderful week. Welcome to class.